We're live.
All right, welcome back, everybody. It's House Energy and Digital Infrastructure, and we're continuing our testimony on Wednesday, February 18th, with additional discussion about H727, an act relating to sustainable data center deployment. And we are going to be talking today with Michael Grady from Ledge Council and Kevin Burke from the Department of Environmental Conservation. And we did push off, we wanted to make sure we had enough time for this discussion before floor. So we did updated our agenda. We pushed off our budget discussion until tomorrow. Alrighty, so we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves, including everybody who's in the room. And then we'll have you guys come and identify yourself for the record. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury. Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington. Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kluckner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Marsibilia.
All right.
Amy Perry for the Crescent Group.
Audrey Lida, interning with Representative Burke.
Billy Coster with the Agency of Natural Resources.
Kevin Burke, DEC Watershed Management Division Director.
Great.
Jared Carpenter, Lake Champlain Committee. Michael Grady, Legislative Council.
Great. And hello. You have to introduce yourself.
Owen Reddy, intern for Representative Spelia.
Welcome. All right. Who's on first?
You want to go? I would prefer. I have to go somewhere else.
Great. Thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
This may be your
James.
first time in our committee.
It is.
Wow. Okay.
It is.
Welcome.
So thanks for having me, and can you first? For the record, my name is Kevin Burke. I am the Vermont DEC Watershed Management Division Director, a role that I've had since a little over November, taking over for our former director of 20 years. Happy to be here to speak to you about data centers. I think generally, data centers, like any other commercial project, would trigger the typical environmental permits, including stormwater permits for impervious surface, construction permits, potentially wetlands permits if not avoided, and the other kind of standard permits that you might have for crossing a stream alteration permit or something to that effect. The other permits that might be applicable to a data center might be something related to cooling water. So if a center is using a fair amount of cooling water, they need to then discharge that warmer water somewhere, and that would be regulated under a NPDES direct discharge permit.
NPDES.
National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. That's the permits under the Federal Clean Water Act that Vermont is delegated to manage. Essentially, wastewater treatment plants have an NPDES permit. Construction, stormwater. There's a number of industrial activities also often require NPDES permits. But in this case, if they were discharging waste as a result of cooling the operation, that discharge would need to be permitted, so that we can determine and ensure that the water quality standards are still going to be met in the receiving water, such as from thermal impacts if it's warmer water entering cold water stream or river, and potentially other pollutants that might come along with it if applicable.
So Bill, do you have a question? I've some too.
Yeah, I'm looking for some context to kind of put my head around here in terms of something in Vermont now, in particular with something that is using a lot of water to cool. And so potentially consuming a lot of water if you're getting a lot of evaporation.
One historical example would have been Vermont Yankee, where they they have required significant cooling, and for a long time there was a thermal impact downstream of the plant because of the water is warmed when it's used for cooling and then it's returned to the river.
So would you be monitoring would we be monitoring? Do regulations require us to monitor consumption of like how much water?
Currently, I believe the only surface water withdrawal regulatory requirement might be through Act 250.
Okay,
The Vermont, the Rivers program within our division, does require certain users of water that are basically conducting water withdrawals, to report that to our department. I believe that was under Act 121. To better get it, for us to get a better sense as to sort of how much water is being used, particularly given the drought last summer. I think the only exemption from who reports under that would be agriculture.
if I could just ask one more question, since GMP and the commissioner and now you have identified the VY site as a large one in different ways, but if we had a data center that wanted to site there, it's an attractive site, it's got transmission, it's got some systems there, what would happen? Like from your perspective in terms of water quality, what are the checks on that?
In terms of the water withdrawal specifically,
Yeah, I mean, I know there are a lot more processes. We've got Billy Coster from A&R here who could talk about Act 250 in bigger picture, but yeah, what water processes would come into play or when would they come into play for something like that?
I think if they're proposing to discharge to the Connecticut River, they would require a discharge permit, which would have more, its own monitoring parameters associated with it, specific to the operation.
And what if it was proposed to be at a site that was connected to public water? Would there be any check on that?
I believe that, I'm kind of starting to speak outside the watershed management division.
Okay.
But the drinking water and groundwater protection division within our department would certainly be reviewing new water connections to ensure that there's capacity. And whether that was perhaps, I don't want to overly speak for that division. But I think there's some checks and balances there. Same with wastewater.
And just one more for you, Madam Chair. If we do have time, he isn't on the agenda, but Mr. Coster is here for DNR, and it may be helpful to also ask him questions related to Act 250. I don't mean right in this moment, but if he's able to stay. Happy to help.
I have a quick follow-up to that.
Great, and I have questions too. So here we go about water.
I think you might have answered this, but I just want to make explicit that we have jurisdictional authority over the Connecticut River in terms of intake and discharge.
Yes, on our side of the river.
Okay. Just pretty narrow for quite a lot of.
Yeah, it depends, I suppose, where you are in the river. And, there could be, if there's impacts to the bank, the river bank, there could be other rivers requirements. If there's infrastructure going, say, at the floodplain. River corridor.
Temperature of the water discharge, is there any parameters that protect how much the temperature can vary when it goes back in?
Yes, I don't have the specifics under the water quality standards, but temperature is a criteria. So there would need to be an evaluation of how the discharge, would affect the temperature of the river. Similar to a wastewater treatment plant, you have, obviously like a mixing zone,
Right.
where, the temperature of the river combined with perhaps the warmer discharge would mix, and an evaluation would need to be made to ensure that the river isn't overly warm to protect biota, fish.
Regulations that would cover that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Did you say there are regulations?
Yes.
So back to staying on the water question. So being kind of a visual person, I need to bring it down even a further level. So we're using the VY site as just a hypothetical example, but it helps me picture it. So if a big data center, hypothetically were to want to site there, how many gallons of water does a data center like that pull out of the river? Do they suck it in through big pipes? Does it kill a bunch of fish? I'm really trying to picture, I can't
I
wrap
don't-
my head around what this looks like.
I don't know specifically how much water a data center would need, and I think it would depend on the scale of the data center. I don't think there would be, if there was an intake, I think there would be the need for, a stream alteration permit. But I would hope that there would be practices in place to prevent pulling anything into their intake.
For the record, yes.
Yeah, so Billy Coster, Agency of Natural Resources. Kevin's correct. There's surface water withdrawals for a number of different purposes. Skier snowmaking is a popular one in Vermont. So we do regulate typically through Act 250, but I think through the stream alteration program that Kevin runs and some other DEC programs, both the volume and nature of that withdrawal. So whatever's in the surface water is regulated to make sure it's not sucking water at a rate that's going to suck in fish or other things. It's not having an erosive effect on the river or lake. And then typically it's paired with some sort of storage so that you're withdrawing that water at a rate that is reasonable. And then you're storing it so that if you need to dispatch it faster than what you can take from the river, you've got some headroom to do that. So that's why you see large snowmaking ponds associated with ski areas and stuff like that. So you're generally not sucking out of the river at the pace you need to
cool.
Yeah.
And okay, that's really helpful. The ski area is easy for me to picture. And in times of drought, when you might not want to be drawing from the river, or you might want to be drawing a lot less from the river, or is there a way to make sure that the stored reserves are sufficient to keep that plant cool? Like what do you do if there's an extended drought and they go through their reserves?
That's a good question. I mean, going back to the ski area, which is a different example, but if the stream flow goes down to a certain point, below a certain specified level, they might not be able to withdraw. That's a reality that occurred going into this fall. I recall looking at some of the ski areas, that might have been challenged with looking at some of these streams that were running really, really low, and not being able to withdraw as much water as they wish they could. I don't know how that would affect a data center. I think you would need a sizable quantity of water. It would have to be something like the Connecticut River. I think a sizable drainage area that would hold a fair amount of water.
Yeah, because it seems like a different level of problem. Like if a ski area can't make snow, it's a bummer for them. But if a data center can't cool, that's a whole nother
And I don't know
problem.
if they have redundancies, through the use of groundwater withdrawals. That might be something the industry relies upon. I really don't know.
Brooke Kleppner? Oh, and then Helen, sorry.
AI believes that average data center uses 300,000 gallons a day. For larger ones, according to AI, between 1 and 5 million gallons a day. And I have read a bit about their efforts to reduce that and to develop cooling systems that reuse the same water in a closed way, so they don't have to draw water all the time.
For Helen?
Would you also have control over them having a reservoir pond that they're using to cool, that they wouldn't be allowed to heat that pond water up through higher than a typical ambient? Meaning that
If it was a constructed pond, I think, of their own, I think that would be something different. Than it wouldn't be regulated like a surface water pond.
but if it theoretically got hot enough, other things might grow in it, and they'd have to treat it before they discharge it. So any discharge from this plant is going to be controlled and regulated.
Correct.
I just did a little quick Googling, and nuclear plants use on average 20,000 gallons of water per minute.
Oh,
So, and Vermont Yankee was authorized to discharge up to 540 million gallons a day. So I think the scale of its water use sounds like it far exceeded what was contemplated for the sand. think as Kevin said, the Connecticut is a pretty large watershed. It's got a lot of water in it, even under drought conditions. And if DY, if those numbers hold at that site, then they're probably ahead or something like a data center.
Okay.
Not much else to add, other than, just, I can't speak for other divisions, within our department, but of course, if there was any type of air emission, that could also be regulated by the department. So there could be some other requirements that would be covered, sort of permitted, but then wrapped up into a, say, an Act 250 permit or Public Utility Commission permit, sort of to satisfy certain criteria.
So the policy areas within your purview, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you're telling us that Vermont has, through Act 250 and then its various permitting programs that are in place, we have the authority and the ability to regulate sufficiently and protectively regulate around a data center that would come in. We don't need to add anything.
I don't know absolutely, if that's the case, if there's any, not being a data center expert, I don't know if we're missing anything. But I think just being mindful that, somewhat relying upon some of our permitting and requirements, say river corridor, floodplains, things like that, is through Act 250 there's guidance that we're expecting applicants to follow, and the Act 250 Commission may or may not require certain things currently. So if a data center, for example, fell into an area where Act 250 didn't apply or was somehow exempt, there might be more protections needed.
And I can just add, Kevin's division focuses largely on withdrawals and discharges to surface waters. We have another division that focuses on groundwater impacts. So if a data center were to use a groundwater source to cool or to discharge into underground wells, we do have a whole suite of regulations associated with those activities. Whether those are sufficient to address data centers is a question we can certainly get back to you on, or have Brian Redmond, the head of that division, come in to speak to you as well.
It'd be great. Yeah. Yeah, I would appreciate that. I'm worried about the water. So as Rep. Sebelius was from the beginning with the spill, it's one of my primary concerns.
So I guess just sorry.
That's it. No,
Rep.
yeah.
Allen had another question.
No, but it's all surface water, whether it be a river or a lake. So whether it be Lake Champlain or on this side of the lake.
It would be regulated the same.
Temperature variation from intake to.
It might be evaluated differently, given that, it's not a river versus a lake environment.
Thank you for your testimony today. And I guess just a different way of asking the question. Are there any things in particular you would suggest to us we should keep in mind or think about?
Well, data centers, I'm very familiar with the types of projects that go through the Public Utility Commission. They're utility projects. A data center seems to be a commercial project. Doesn't seem to fit. So I don't, while we participate, our division, similar in Act 250, we would require an applicant, whether to do the PUC or public utility or a PUC or Act 250, require the same applicable permits. The process is a little different. Commercial projects. And Billy can probably speak to that in more depth.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.
And if you have any other questions, by all means, reach out.
We will. Great. Is Mike needed?
Sure.
So, Alex, can I share?
It's just, go to the Zoom link and then I'll make you a co-host. Sure, from there.
Do you send the Zoom link separately from the invite?
Yes, I sent it this morning.
Okay, sorry.
You can resend it too.
Sorry. So this is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council. I was asked to talk about what some of the water statutory and regulatory protections there would be if there was a large volume user, not just a data center, but another applicable entity using large volumes of water. So in some respects, I'm going to duplicate what Kevin said and maybe even what Billy's about to say. But I can also address some of the other programs, excuse me. So I'll first start with groundwater, and one of the things you need to know is that both groundwater and surface water are public trust resources, and means that they're held by the state in trust for the public. And there was an environmental division decision in 2011 about what that meant for groundwater, and it means that whenever there's a potential effect on groundwater, there must be an analysis to determine whether or not the activity that will create the effect is going to be managed in order to protect public health and welfare. And A&R was directed to come up with that analysis, and they adopted a rule called the Groundwater Protection Rule and Strategy. And the purpose of it is to manage groundwater for different classes and to protect it, and to ensure that it's there for future uses for the public. So that requirement is integrated into almost every A&R rule, whether or not it's a standalone component of an A&R rule, or whether or not the A&R rule cross-references the groundwater protection rule and strategy. So every rule that's going to affect groundwater has to have this public trust analysis within it. So any proposed use of groundwater, depending on the site, the scope, the activity, will be going through this analysis in some form or another. And when or what permits would they be going through for groundwater?
Sorry, just before you go, I have one quick question. I'm sorry, this is water is a brand new topic for me anyway. Groundwater is only groundwater, so we are now not currently talking about rivers.
We're not talking about rivers. We are literally, the definition of groundwater
Is literally water in the ground.
Water on the surface of the ground.
Okay, so we are just talking about that
Right.
now.
But I was asked to talk about how a data center might affect a public water system.
Yeah.
And public water systems don't all draw from surface waters. Many of them are drawing from groundwater sources. And if there is that groundwater source, as you have to do source water permitting, you have to identify what your source is, you have to identify its use, you have to identify its proposed scope of use, effectively what its the maximum capacity of it is. And so then anytime, and Kevin was referencing this earlier, when there's a connection from a existing water line to a public water system, there has to be a permit, and A&R needs to issue that permit. There's actually a bill in the Senate right now that would create a general permit for connections. And part of the issue with that is how to determine capacity, whether or not your public water system has capacity. If you were going to connect a data center with, Billy, did you say 300,000 gallons a day?
Yeah.
And you would have to determine that connection, that water supply had the capacity to supply that data center while also supplying the other users of the system. So that would be part of a connection to a public water system. And conversely, when you have water on a public water system, you're probably going to have your wastewater on a public wastewater treatment system, and you're going to have a connection to that as well. And you have to determine whether or not your treatment plant has the capacity to handle that amount of wastewater per day as well. So again, whether or not you could use these public systems for a data center depends on the scope and scale of what they are doing and the scope and scale of what systems you have. You can't put something that uses millions of gallons of water a day on a small town public water system, your fire district system, because it wouldn't handle it. So that is part of the review and evaluation for them.
So if you had a data system proposed to hook into a public water supply and there was not enough capacity, what would happen? Like, what would happen? So would they have the option of, because this is something I think we have seen nationally, paying to upgrade the system?
That's actually there's potential for that. There's potential for the applicant to say, hey, we will find you another groundwater source. We will find you more supply in order for us to be located here and to join your system. There's potential for that.
Would it, but, well, so it would be, there's not enough water. So either you're not going here or we're going to figure something else out, which is you're going to pay for there to be more water.
Or as Kevin referenced earlier, the multiple redundancies that could be used. Maybe you are taking some water from surface water. Maybe you're taking some water from a groundwater well, which isn't connected to your public water system. So it's a private well. And maybe you're taking it some from a public water system as well in order to always have those redundancies so that if there is a drought, you have some backup. And that is not unusual in Vermont. The example that I could give you is cheese making in Vermont.
Okay.
There are cheese makers that are hooked up to both the public water system and have groundwater wells so that they always have a necessary supply of water for their processing.
And do we require any kind of monitoring of the consumption of water or the amount of discharge?
So if you're hooked up to a public water system, you're getting charged for that.
Okay, right.
But if you're taking from a groundwater well, you potentially have to get a groundwater withdrawal permit. And you can see over here when you would need that permit when you were withdrawing greater than 57,600 gallons per day. It's a weird number, but it's about like the rate that your well can pump in a minute. And that is how they set that standard. So if you are going to be withdrawing more than that per day, you have to get a large volume groundwater withdrawal permit, and there are reporting requirements underneath that.
There are reporting requirements. So and can you say briefly what those are?
I was just going to say, no, I only cut and paste a little bit of it. You have to report your usage.
Is it like to DEC?
To DEC,
Yes.
yes. And so first you have to protect your source, then you have to protect or regulate the amount you're pulling out of groundwater. And then there's the connections, which is the wastewater system and potable water supply. And you have to make sure that those systems, when you connect, have capacity for the proposed use. But as Representative Sevilla just said, there's opportunity for people to pay
Yeah,
for upgrade, increase supply, maybe redo your wastewater treatment plant so that you can handle the supply of wastewater that's being discharged to that system.
Madam Chair, we are trying to get a national expert on water and data centers that could testify, I think, to some of that, practically speaking. Right.
So surface waters are also a public trust, and there is a declaration of that in a weird chapter of law. It's in the public property law, where you, the General Assembly, has declared the surface waters to be public property and within the public trust. So it has the same sort of analysis. There's an analysis that's required by court precedent about determining whether or not the use of a surface water is going to sufficiently protect the public interest in that water. However, and there are things like the source surface water permit, where you have to, if you're going to be drawing from the surface water for your potable water, for your public water system, you have to get this permit. There's different standards from the groundwater source protection permit, but it is still intended to protect that use of that water, so it is used wisely and in the public benefit. And there is a surface water withdrawal report, but there's not necessarily a permit as of yet.
Wait, what?
Right, you have to report your surface water withdrawals. Anyone who withdraws 10,000 gallons or more of surface water within 24 hours or 150,000 gallons or more in 30 days is required to fill out an online form to register and report. So you're registering, but you're not getting permitted. And this was a whole part of the discussion back when you did surface water withdrawal in 2022. Ultimately, you're supposed to move towards a permit program, but right now I don't believe you are permitting.
I'll just add that if a project is jurisdictional in Act 250, they do regulate withdrawals through the DEC Rivers program. They enter into a flow agreement that specifies the rate at which they can withdraw water based on the volume in the source. So there's an analysis that occurs around this issue of surface water withdrawal through the Act 250 process, and there are conditions put in place there. That's what we see with skier is, yes, the most common. But so when projects go through Act 250 and involve a surface water withdrawal, there is regulation and permit conditions through the Act 250 process.
But there's also a separate ski area rule for surface water withdrawal for ski stormwater water ponds at ski areas, which has additional conditions and criteria that apply to all of them that are separate from Act 250.
Yes.
So that was done decades ago. Now,
So- You go.
Go ahead, Madam Chair. Well, so Vermont Yankee did not need a permit.
That was regulated by the PUC, so all the same Act 250 criteria applied. So I don't know. That was way before me. I'm not sure how their surface water withdrawals were regulated.
so they were discharging. Remember that temperature is a pollutant. And so even though their intake may not have been regulated,
Permitted.
their outtake, their discharge was, and the state did litigate that to determine what the sufficiency of their discharges were for purposes of temperature, because there was concern that the temperature discharges were killing or making aquatic habitat not meet the standards. And so that was litigated over several years, and the state mostly won.
So through Act 250, there are criteria that have to be met and conditions that would be levied or put in place.
Right.
But that's different from applying for a permit.
Right.
Automatically.
So this is some of the requirements for water management under Act 250. So development means any withdrawal of more than 340,000 gallons of water per day from any well or spring. So that triggers Act 250. Regardless if you trigger it any other way, it can trigger it. And now you have Tier 1A, and that might trigger the requirement and demonstrating that the public water and wastewater systems have the capacity to support additional development within the Tier 1A area.
Sorry, and how many, I'm sorry, can you go back up? How many gallons did we say data center might be?
I think it was said that they were using 300,000 gallons of groundwater or of water.
Water. So this could be below that.
It would be below that, but in addition to that requirement, there's all of these, and I don't have all of the criteria, though you know the criteria, the list is long, but one of them is its effect on groundwater. And so in reviewing, if it triggers the Act 250 permit criteria, and one of the commission is authorized to look at how it would affect groundwater and would have the ability, as Mr. Costa just said, to set conditions on the use of that. That's part of Act 250. So it's not just Act 250 because municipalities have authority too. One of the things that Mr. Burke referenced earlier is river corridor development or NFIP development. Does anyone know what NFIP? NFIP is the National Flood Insurance Program that's run by FEMA. If you're located within a flood hazard area, you generally want to get flood insurance, and the only people really that you can get flood insurance from is through the FEMA NFIP program. And NFIP has specific requirements for development and what can be allowed within that flood hazard area. Now the General Assembly a couple of years ago also went to river corridor development permitting, which the agency has been developing river corridor permits and is moving towards a permitting program for development in a river corridor. I would expect that Vermont Yankee is going to be in a river corridor if it's not already in a flood hazard area. So it will have to comply with both the NFIP requirements and the river corridor permitting for any new activity on that site. So that's part of the land use requirements that could apply to that site as well.
You're right, we passed that bill 2 years ago, last year,
2024, I believe.
2024, and it's in rulemaking now?
No, the agency's seeking some deadline extensions.
There's a lot of work happening with it right now.
Yeah,
But the rulemaking hasn't commenced formally. We're doing the background analytical work and public engagement, and as Mr. Grady suggested, I believe there's working for a little more time.
that's right, and this
There's a
was the bill
schedule.
that basically moved us to a statewide regulatory approach for river corridors rather than the town by town.
But
Well, it's back to me now.
there is town by town. You still have town by town. There is authority there, and some town might already be regulating in the river corridor. And so it's possible that if a data center elects to drop into a town, the town is already regulating that development within the river corridor underneath their municipal authority, because they have shoreland regulation authority. They have wetlands regulation authority. Municipalities have significant water resource regulation authority. And so that's something to keep in mind if a municipality was concerned about the effects on its water resources. It has some authority to regulate that. And I would just say that all of this is dependent on site-specific conditions. You know, where it's going, what system is there, the scope, the scale, what is going to be used, how many people are going to be there. We didn't even talk about if you have a certain number of people on site every day using drinking water, using toilets, wastewater, then you need another permit. And if you are a certain type of industry, you're going to need, as Kevin referenced earlier, you're going to need a construction general permit and a separate industrial stormwater permit. So the scope and universe of how a site like this could be regulated is pretty significant. And the General Assembly, the state, the agency has multiple tools to use to ensure that the water is managed the way it's supposed to, according to the public trust, for the benefit of everyone, and so that it is available for all public trust uses. So both groundwater and surface water.
So is there anything in particular that you would advise us to think about, or risks that you see that are not covered based on what you understand now?
I do think, and I think this could probably be handled through Act 250, that the surface water withdrawal provisions are not as vigorous as they could be. It's not as vigorous as they are in other states. After seeing the drought conditions last year, you should have some concerns about how to manage that. And I think there's something called 7Q10, when the flow of a river drops below its lowest point, generally over 7 consecutive days in the 10th month period, like in August, effectively. When you hit 7Q10, you can't do a lot. You can't do a lot with that surface water. And then what would the conditions be if that water hits 7Q10? I don't know. It would really depend on the use of the site and what needs they have. Which is why if I were a data center, I'd have redundancy. I'd have a connection to a public water system. I'd have a private groundwater well. If I was close enough to the surface water and the conditions for the use of the surface water were not too onerous, I would get a permit for that as well. And so that is the other thing to think about. It's not just, and this is why I say Act 250 is a potential tool. It's about the combined effect, which Act 250 is supposed to review.
So in terms of surface water, what do you have suggestions for how should we lower the amount that's necessary for?
You know, I think having sat through and drafted some of the surface water withdrawal bill, it's a pretty sensitive subject because it's your municipalities, it's your public drinking water, it's some of your industries are using it, it's your agriculture, and getting to a permit for that. I mean, I would want to talk to A&R about where they are in the status for that, but like where they stand, if they think it's necessary or whether they can basically control it through the discharge permits that they have.
Would lowering the amount for the trigger?
For reporting?
Yeah.
So you would, I mean, that's a possibility.
Would that be as contentious potentially? Is what I'm trying to say?
You know, the people that had the most concern about the trigger were the farmers.
Mhm.
And the farmers basically said, you know, in a time, in normal times, we don't have to go to surface water because we have a groundwater well, we have enough water, we have enough rain. But if we need to go to the surface water in one day, depending on our crop, we could exceed that. And do you want to bring us into a regulatory program for one day of use? So that's why they report to the Agency of Agriculture and they don't report to DEC, because the Agency of Agriculture is a more familiar umbrella for them. And so they don't feel like they're being brought into at the end of a regulatory scheme, but they are. I mean, they're part of the program now. But lowering it, I think you would create more anxiety for people.
So do you have any recommendation?
I think you're pretty well protected.
Okay.
I think, considering that, I don't see how one of these is built that skirts Act 250, maybe at 9.5 acres. But in a 10-acre town. But then I think the municipality would probably assert some jurisdiction there. I think the municipality would have control over the connection to its public water system and wastewater system. I think there are enough controls, as long as you're allowing controls. Like if you put it into 248 and municipality doesn't have that regulatory authority, just advisory authority, then that's different.
But that's not what we're contemplating.
Right.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Do we have questions for Billy or?
I'm just interested if he has any, information he'd like us to think about.
Sure. So I think, Mr. O'Grady suggested.
You wanna come up?
Sure.
So,
Oh, yeah, sorry. Alex, can you add him to the agenda?
Yes.
Please, thank you.
We are Billy Coster, Director of Planning and Policy for the Agency of Natural Resources. In my division, I have both the Climate Action Office that you hear from regularly through James Zorchek and that wonderful team. I also have the Planning Office, which represents the agency in Act 215 and Section 248 proceedings and does a lot of the policy work that crosses all of our departments. So this sits squarely in that part of my work. And I think Mr. O'Grady is correct that largely there's probably sufficient protections in place to regulate these sorts of facilities if they go through Act 250. And, we can certainly bring in folks to speak in more detail about the stream flow and surface water withdrawal question and any groundwater withdrawal questions. So if that would be helpful, we can line those folks up. But I do think, generally speaking, if Act 250 is triggered for a facility of this scale, the sorts of concerns that you have shared are going to be considered. I think the one exemption, the one gap is again what Mr. O'Grady spoke to. In towns with zoning and subdivision bylaws, commercial development in Act 250 is only triggered on parcels greater than 10 acres. So if you have a data center on a relatively small parcel in a town with zoning and subdivision bylaws, it may be exempt from Act 250. Or in a tier 1A area, which is unlikely but possible, right? So an easy fix for that is just to add to Act 250 a very simple jurisdictional trigger that says, data centers or some generic facility of a certain magnitude, like 20 megawatts or whatever the size you all are. I don't know how the data center size.
In the bill.
20 megawatts.
Yeah. So however it's defined in that bill, just simply say that, an Act 250 permit is required for these facilities. Full stop, no matter where it is in the state. And then you would ensure that these would go through the Act 250 review. I would suggest you confer with the Land Use Review Board just to make sure that they agree that that's the best way to do it. But I think as long as these go through Act 250, you both have the opportunity for the towns and, citizens to engage in the process. And you have the whole suite of criteria that are applicable. And then you do have all the collateral permits at our agency issues. So it's certainly possible that a facility like this could meet all the regulatory burdens in Vermont and be successful. But if there was risk of not doing that, Act 250 and the collateral permits would likely catch it.
So I'm just frantically jotting this suggestion down so that Act 250 would be required for a project 20 megawatt or higher and get some testimony from the lawyer.
Yeah, and I would just invite them to basically suggest the best way to make sure that no matter where these are proposed, if they reach a certain scale, that Act 250 review.
And we haven't heard from them yet on this building. So that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot to come and talk to.
Yeah.
Great.
Folks have additional questions? All right. Thanks everybody for being here. That was really helpful. We can go off live and we are back tomorrow.